About model paints and the different types that are available, and some of the little how-to. Not going to go into too depth on how-to, more than just the real high-level stuff of how they were available and some basic information on thinning and things like that. So like I said, the different types you're going to come across enamels, which are oil-based, acrylics, which are a water-based paint, lacquers, which are sometimes called acrylic lacquers, which makes it confusing for everybody. They're not the same as an acrylic. They're an acrylic lacquer. They're solvent-based, which is acetone, and hybrid, which are alcohol-based. And by alcohol, I mean isopropyl alcohol. Oil paints, which are linseed oil-based, which you'd see like artists using to do oil paintings. So enamels. The common brands you're going to come across, not so much anymore, but Testers Model Master was a thing. Kind of defunct now, but you might still have a few in your stash. Humbrol Tinlets, which I think most people would have grown up on if you're a bit old like me. Revell Tinlets, Tamiya square bottles. So this type of Tamiya paint is an enamel. And some Alclad, branded as Alclad 2 lacquers, are actually enamels. So trick for new players. So the benefits of a enamel paint is that they're tough once they're dry. They tend to bite into the plastic because they're quite hot. They're okay to brush paint because they're slow drying. They're relatively easy to spray, and they can be reactivated with thinner, as in if you hit it with the same sort of thinner you've used to thin it, you can reactivate the paint. The disadvantages is that they take a long time to dry. They can take ages. They're becoming harder to find. Like you can still get this sort pretty easily, but the old Testers paints are not easy to come across anymore, let's put it that way. They're quite aggressive chemically, so they're not particularly good for you. You cannot use, I mean, this is probably obvious, but you can't use an enamel wash over an enamel paint because the thinner in the wash will reactivate the paint, and you'll have a very sad day because it'll probably all just curdle up and look terrible. And it smells not particularly great. Depends on what your point of view is, I suppose. So some other enamels that you'll see a lot of is wash products that you'll see sort of around. So I brought a couple in. These are pre-made. So you've got the weathering wash panel liner, which is the Mr. Colour stuff. Also MIG and AK, which is this sort of stuff, makes them. They're a pre-made wash. And they're really good because they're really low viscosity, which means they work really well as panel liners and things like that. The gotcha is, like I said, is if you have chosen to use an enamel paint, you can't use an enamel wash on top, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Yeah.
Just my 2 cents. One thing you can do with like the spraying paints is process your hand brush.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really good for that sort of stuff. You can, when we get to the other types of paints like a lacquer or an acrylic, you can basically dunk them in it and it will just shrug it off. So thinners for enamels, you're going to come across enamel thinners. Now, this is not enamel thinners, but if you go and buy it at Toy World or one of your local hobby shops, you'll find a bottle that looks exactly like this, same colour, same number, but without the A. That's enamel thinner. I know it's confusing, but don't mix them up, you'll have a bad time. This is not that, but it looks like that. So Tamiya X20 is an example of hobby enamel thinner. General purpose thinners, just the stuff you buy from Supercheap, that works really, really well to spray enamels with. Terps, and also you can actually thin enamels with lacquer thinner. It will actually work. Some primers that you'll see around that are enamels. The thing is with primers that are enamel, again, they're slow drying, which means they self-level, which is a good thing, but it means they take forever to dry. They're tough. They tend to stick to metal better than acrylics or a lacquer. But one disadvantage is they can go off in the bottle. Sometimes you'll open the bottle and it'll just be a big congealed mess. Some rattle cans you'll find that are also enamels. They'll say on the tin if they're enamel or not. And also the other point I was making is the Alclad 2 lacquer is enamel, because Alclad 2 lacquer is the trade name, not what's in the bottle. So, yeah. Okay, acrylics. So water-based acrylics. Yep.
Sorry, I got one more thing to add. This alternative to mineral turpentine, to turpentine is, I think it's called white spirits.
Yep.
Or like, so you can get like odorless white spirits, which does more or less the same thing. So it works, you know. Oh, you got that there?
Yep.
That must thank you.
Yeah, true.
It's just more refined, isn't it?
Yeah. So acrylics are water-based acrylics. They're an emulsion type of paint. The brands you'll see a lot of, everyone will probably have seen Vallejo. So a couple of examples here. The Vallejo bottles, everyone would have seen those. AK or AK 3rd Gen, MIG, Army Painter, Games Workshop, Model Master Acryl, Mission Models, this stuff, don't rate it, but anyway, Mission Models. More Alclad 2 lacquer, that's an acrylic. So that's fun. So yeah, that's just an example of some funny naming schemes. So the benefits to an acrylic is that it's fast drying. It's excellent for brush painting, especially if you put a couple of, like some retarder or something in your thinner. Has a wide range of colours, like pretty much anything you could possibly think of. They're easy to find. They're impervious to enamels. Like you were saying before, is that if you paint with an acrylic, like a water-based acrylic, you can use an enamel as a wash. You could literally dunk the whole thing in enamel, and then just using an enamel thinner, has to be not the general purpose thinners, the enamel thinner, the more gentle kind, you can wipe the enamel off and it won't affect the paint underneath unless you scrub really hard. It's non-toxic unless you drink it or do something silly with it. It's non-toxic, but it cannot be reactivated. So if you put water on it after it's dry, it's not going to reactivate. Positive and a negative. The disadvantages to acrylics is that they're fragile. They're a lot more fragile than an enamel or a lacquer because they don't bite to the surface. They actually make a skin over the top. They're harder to spray. Some people will probably disagree with me with this, but this is my personal experience. They're harder to spray. You tend to get a lot of tip dry. You have to play around with thinning and different additives and everything to get it to spray well and consistently. They're inconsistent would be the way I would put it. They're not impossible to spray. That Iroquois up there, that's all painted in acrylics with an airbrush. Not easy to use, let's put it that way. They perform best over, because like I said, they form a skin. So if you put them over the top of a primer, it gives them a better chance to grip to something because the primer gives it something to grip to. And they can't be reactivated, which is also a negative. If you're wanting to do that, you can't do that with an acrylic. So your thinners you can use with acrylics would be water. You can use tap water, you can use distilled water, but water will work. The brand or thinner or reducer for the particular type. Sorry, Pete. A couple of examples: Mission Models reducer or Createx. That will work in anything else. It's just a reducer. But your worst case scenario, you can use water and it will work just fine. If you're going to spray it or brush it, paint it for that matter either, this is not my advice is from using it. These are really good, but it comes from a guy in Model Paint Solutions who runs that store over there. Is use a additive with like a flow aid and a retarder. Use about 5% of each of those by volume. You can adjust it. It's not a hard rule, but as a starting point, that will make things, it'll make the acrylic flow better and you won't get things like brush marks. Well, less chance of getting brush marks. It's not a guarantee. And you'll have more success with spraying an acrylic if you put something like this in it, because it will flow better and it will have a bit of time. The retarder slows down the drying time so it can actually self-level a little bit. Okay, primers. The primers, again, they form a skin. They don't stick as well as an enamel or a lacquer primer because it does still form a skin over the top. Depending on the type, you can find they tend to gall. So what I mean by that is if you're sanding it, it rolls itself into little balls, it tears up, it doesn't sand nicely, it doesn't feather. So out of the ones that I've used, that Ammo One Shot up there on the photo, I've got that, I've used that. It's okay, it works out pretty well. The Vallejo stuff is trash, it's hot garbage, and anyone who tells you otherwise is delusional. It's awful. It galls, it's like rubber, it's terrible. Just throw it in the bin, don't buy it. You can disagree with me for
Yeah,
it.
I just so it's like it's like polyurethane, isn't it?
Yeah, it's latex.
Yeah, so basically it makes like a shrink board of your model.
Exactly.
So if you tear it, it just peels.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly. So the thing is with it, like I see people use the Vallejo stuff in particular, and they have success. So if you're just wanting to put an undercolor, it's probably fine. But if you're using it to sand, to look for defects or whatever, it's awful. It's just bad. So my advice is it's bad. There's also the Mr. Surfacer stuff, Aqueous, which is not sure 100% if it's an acrylic or it's a hybrid. It is, so I'm wrong, there you go. That one's actually alcohol-based. Speaking of not alcohol-based, but speaking about lacquers, which is solvent-based now. So lacquers are solvent-based, so they're based on acetone, I believe. So the common brands you're going to see in Australia, at least, is SMS a lot. Mr. Colour, Tamiya LP, less so. That seems to be a bit hard to come across, certainly here at least. Outlaw paints, MRP or Mr. Paint, Zero paints, some Alclad, what we talked about is lacquer. Their metallics are a lacquer, and others. There's lots of them. So the benefits of a solvent-based lacquer is that they're fast drying. So normally by the time you sprayed it, by the time you finish cleaning your airbrush, it's dry. It may not be completely cured, but it's dry. Comes in a wide range of colours. Easy to find. They're impervious to enamels and oil, so you can use enamels and oil washes over the top. They're really easy to spray. They're super forgiving. Very little, if any, tip dry at all. They can be reactivated with thinner. So if you've already got dry paint and you put the thinner on top, it will reactivate. And you can use that to your advantage, or you can have a sad day if you do it by accident. Again, solvent-based, which is a disadvantage because it stinks and it's not particularly good for you. They're not impossible to brush paint. As you would have seen from Lincoln Wright when he was out here, a lot of his stuff is done by hand, by brush, using lacquers. Does an amazing job, looks incredible. I tried doing it, not so good. But that's more a skill issue, I think, than anything. Thinners used for this, there's different types, but they're all lacquer thinner. So they're all the same, they just have different additives or lack of additives depending what's in it. So you can get slow thinners, and by slow I mean they've got a retarder in it. This is Mr. Leveling thinner, which is awesome. A lot of people you'll hear talk about this as unicorn tears. It's amazing, it's good stuff. The number, by the way, is just the volume. That's 400 mils, that's what the 400 means. It's not something special. There's a fast type, which is the Mr. Rapid thinner, for example. So you'd use Mr. Rapid thinner if you wanted to do a dead flat finish using a matte paint. It will dry faster or flash off faster, so it keeps everything at the surface, doesn't let it sink into the paint as it's drying. Also good for metallics, same reason. And there's also the good old-fashioned hardware store lacquer thinner, which you can buy. The advice from Scott at SMS is buy the premium style with no other additives, because if it gets other things like toluene in it, it can be pretty hot. And if it's hot, you can find it will actually eat the plastic, or it will turn your paint into goo and make a mess. Have tried wiping down, on advice from someone else, to wipe down my model kit using just regular lacquer thinners. It actually melted the plastic. So you can do it, just not with that stuff. Okay, so primers, solvent-based primers. There's SMS's version, which is pre-mixed. You can just shake it and spray it. I tend to thin it a little bit. There's Mr. Surfacer. There's different coarseness, if you want to call it that, of primer. You get 500, which is thick, 1,000 and then 1,500, which is like a finishing, nice and smooth finish. So depending what you're trying to do, if you're trying to fill scratches and stuff, maybe use 500. And if you're trying to just finish off and make sure everything's looking good before you paint, you can use 1,500.
How's the SMS score out of
My opinion is not as good. It's okay. It sprays easy enough. It's just a bit coarse, or I should say, it's coarser than 1,500 Mr. Surfacer. Mr. Surfacer. It's probably, I don't know what Scott would say, but it's somewhere in between 1,000 and 1,500. So it's just a bit coarser, is how I would put it. It's not bad, but if I'm priming to paint afterwards, I would use that. That's why that one's nearly empty, because I've gone through a lot of it. Oh yeah, definitely. So when you buy this stuff, this is like tar. Like, I don't know if you can have a look if you want it later on, but it's thick. So I thin that, and as a general rule, if I'm thinning a jar of lacquer like Tamiya LP, I thin generally around about 30% paint, 70% thinner, and then build it up. Because if you try and go too thick with your paint to get better opacity, it'll spray worse. You can get sputters and all sorts of weird things happening. And it does depend. It's not always a hard rule, but I go about that. So about even sometimes down to less, but depending what you're trying to do. But yeah, definitely thin that. And you want to spray that. You can, I do, and you can spray that through a 0.2 nozzle if you thin the living crap out of it. Otherwise, you want to be using like a 0.4, 0.5 normally because it's thick.
Nathan, we were just saying as well, the Mr. Surfacer 500 is great.
Yes, absolutely. So this one, which is nearly empty and is starting to dry a little bit, I have this one on my desk for doing that exact thing. If I've got a little scratch, you can just put a toothpick in this and put it in the scratch and let it go off, and then you can just sand it flush. It's awesome for that. So same with the Mr. Dissolve putty, same type of thing. It's a lacquer as well, but it's just their putty dissolved in lacquer. You know, wow. Mr. Surfacer. It's a primer. Yep.
I'm just saying my opinions again.
Yeah, that's all right.
I like using like stuff like Mr. Surfacer over the SMS just because like even though you're gonna thin it, you get to get it the right consistency.
Yeah.
But I find sometimes with SMS and the other similar paints, like sometimes it just comes too thick.
I agree.
And you can't compose it.
No, I absolutely agree. And out of my own experience, I tend to thin SMS like all the time. Not heaps, but some. If I might add like 10% or maybe a little bit more, depending.
The other thing about the Mr. Surfacer is that it lasts forever, in my experience. I've got a jar each of 500, 1,000, which I bought close to 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I open them up sometimes after a couple of years, they're quite thick. You spin them down and off you go again. They last forever.
Yeah. And you can actually get, I can't think what they call it, but there's like a renewal fluid. It's not thinner. I'm not sure exactly what's in it, but it does actually, you can renew this type of paint by adding that back, and that will last longer and be better than using just thinners.
Yeah. But the other thing is I do a lot of pre-mixing. The specimen jar, so you buy
Yes.
like Hennes thinks I'm really ill. I've got a couple of hundred of them, and some of them are like 15 years old.
Yeah.
They're still fine.
Yeah, I had some of those. I put some clear in, and then during my time I was sort of using it and not cleaning the lid properly, and it actually glued itself that hard shut. I actually cracked the lid trying to get it open. But anyway, yeah, agree. So I also tend, out of interest sake, I tend to mix my paints in little mixing pipettes. Not pipettes, that's not the right term. Petri dishes, sort of thing. I try and do it outside of the airbrush so that if I make sure it's properly mixed before I put it in, because if you put it in the airbrush and then try and mix it in there, you're never going to get that bit that's down the bottom, right? Anyway, that's just a bonus point. Okay, alcohol-based, everyone's favourite. So alcohol-based, your brands you're going to see the most of are going to be Tamiya, Guernsey Aqueous, and AK Real Colours. They're all a hybrid paint, and they're based on IPA or isopropyl alcohol. So some examples there. It's Gunsy Aqueous. You'll see that a lot over at Toy World. They've got like pretty much not everything, but a lot of it. It's good paint. You'll see the Tamiya X and XF paints. They're all alcohol-based paints. The benefits of the hybrid stuff is it's fast drying, good range of colours, pretty easy to find, at least here. They're impervious to enamels and oils, same as the other acrylics. And they can be thinned with water. They can be thinned with alcohol thinners. Alcohol thinners looks like that. X20A, A for alcohol. X20 is enamel. Don't mix them up. And also you can thin them with lacquer thinner. So this stuff will work with those paints. The disadvantage to these sort of paints is performance will vary depending on which thinners you choose. Some people will say they're awful to spray. Some people will say they're great. It just depends on what you thin them with. And they're hard to brush paint. They tend to tear, like you're saying, they make a skin. And because they dry so quick, as you brush, if you go back over it too soon, it will just like tear itself. It's awful for that. Again, depending what you thin it with though. So you can thin, like I said, with water. You can thin with Mr. Leveling thinner, Tamiya lacquer thinner. You can thin with hardware thinner. These hobby ones seem to be a little bit less hot, so they're probably better for what we do mostly. Not saying don't, but you can. Or isopropyl alcohol. So if you can find isopropyl alcohol, like just that, not rubbing alcohol, you can use that. The only thing is with that is it tends to dry very quickly. Like it flashes off very quick. So I'll just, with this stuff, sorry.
I got one more introduction. Sorry. There's really cool, Kaleo has some metallic alcoholic paints.
Yep.
And those are some of the best metallics I've seen.
Yeah, right.
They feel, I don't know what it is, but somehow the type of medium and like the metal seems a way richer.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've seen there's the, what's it called, real metallic colouring. I can't remember if it's AK. Yeah, that's like wax almost. Is that the stuff? It's in like a tube?
No, it comes in a, I know what you're talking about, but that's the opposite thing.
Yeah.
No, these kind of like little bottles. They're different to the layer pale colour.
Yeah.
These are just specific.
Yeah, okay.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, I know the stuff you mean. It's in the, got this black cap.
Yeah.
Almost like a square bottle.
Molotov
Yes.
chrome is like, it's like
Yeah, agree. Yeah, I've bought the SMS version of that, which is just Molotov and the little pens. Yeah, it's good stuff. But yeah, so if you use these hybrid paints and you use a lacquer thinner, like this stuff, you'll have a much better time. It sprays awesome. It's easy to spray. You can even brush paint with it. Really good. That lacquer thinner changes, I'm not a chemist, but it effectively changes the chemistry to make it like a lacquer. So using that and spraying with those will be much better. The results will be much better than trying to spray using that. That will work, but it's a lot harder to get right. That real color stuff, as far as I'm aware, it's a hybrid, but I could be wrong. So, like I said, you can absolutely thin it with lacquer thinner, and it will perform amazing. It's very, very, as far as I was aware, it's very similar to Gunsy and Tamiya. So I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's alcohol based. Okay, so last paint type we're going to quickly talk about is oil paint. So oil paints, you're going to commonly see Abtalon 502, which is a hobby brand style paint, that stuff. Ammo oil brusher, which comes in the convenient mascara tubes. It's actually quite handy, but you get more in this for similar money. But anyway. Streaking brushes, which are also in a mascara tube, but it's a bit thinner. That's what it means. Same stuff. Windsor and Newton, Gamblin, there's heaps. Go to your local art store and you'll find heaps.
There's Artist Spectrum is like an Australian brand, I believe. And
Yep.
they do like really good starter sets.
Yep.
You just get like a bunch of colours, like pretty cheap.
Yeah, nice.
And those good sweats are
Yeah, nice. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience in the art oils. I've just sort of dabbled in. I want that color. I want a burnt umber. I just grab burnt umber.
It's surprisingly cheap just to like getting it in the art store than getting it in the hobby store.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
I find that a lot more winter and
Yeah.
they take a lot longer to dry than
That is true.
Some people use it cardboard, so it's
Yes.
extra oil.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So the benefits to oil paint is very slow drying. If you keep it sealed, like you were saying, if you put it on a bit of cardboard to soak the linseed oil out, and then you cover it with cling wrap so it's not squashing the paint, or put it in a container or something like that, and then put it in the fridge or the freezer, it will last for weeks. It will not go off for ages. It's really, really, you can keep it for ages and ages. You can get, obviously, being an artist-based paint, you can get pretty much any color you can possibly think of. This one is particularly a modeling color. It's called Starship Filth. I don't know if everyone's heard of it, but it is great. It's a great color for panel line washes, for doing grunge and smut in cockpits, or anywhere else you want it. Grease, like there's other colors obviously, but this is awesome for doing that because it's sort of a grey, greeny, browny mix. It's cool. And they're easy to find, like we talked about. You can go to any art store and buy it. It doesn't have to be a hobby shop. Disadvantages are, again, slow drying. So if you come out the next day, the good thing is it's slow drying. So if you look at it and go, no, I'm not happy with that, you can just wipe it off, start again, or you can move it around some more because it's still not set. But if you come out the next day and go, I'm happy with that, and then you actually put your thumb in it, it's going to probably all over the place. So it's a positive and a negative. And they're hard to brush paint from the bottle because of the extra linseed oil. You kind of want to, you don't have to, but you can kind of leak some of that out and it'll be less movable. You can, I'm just lazy. Yeah. So you can thin oil paints with white spirits, or this, which is the same thing but odorless, terps, mineral turpentine, or lighter fluid, which is naphtha. The gouges, like I've said, and I'll repeat it again, and I even put it there in red so you wouldn't mix it. Don't put it on an enamel paint. If you've done an enamel finish, don't put this on top. You will have a bad time. It will eat. You will reactivate the paint and you'll have a bad day. You can, if it's an acrylic, and you're careful. Because if you get a bit excited and you start using this to wipe some off and you break through the paint, you're going to have a bad day. So you can, I'd recommend against it. And that's, yes. Yeah, 100%. So the thing is, you can paint any paint over any other paint. The whole idea that you can't put a lacquer on an enamel or an enamel on a lacquer, that's just not true. You can. You just don't do it like enamels because they take so long to dry. If you go enamel and then come in the next day and put a lacquer or an acrylic on top, more an acrylic, put an acrylic on top, it's going to not look very good. It's going to make a mess because the underlying paint hasn't cured. You have to let whatever the paint is cure before you put the other paint on top. That's just how it is. I've done it, so I know for a fact that's true. Anyway, so you can use your oil paints for modeling how I use it, and I know it can be used differently. Some figure painters just use oil paint, just oil paint totally. You do? Okay. Yeah, so I'm nearly finished anyway. It's only like 3 slides left. So you can use it for doing stains. You can do it for washes. If you thin it down using white spirit like this stuff, you can make pin washes. You can put it on neat directly on top. So those exhausts you can see on there on the left for the caribou, that's all done with all the staining for the blue, the oil streaks, the exhaust stains, all done with oil paint. So those were a combination of, I started off with the light colours and then working my way up to the dark. But as I got further up, I stopped thinning. And like the bluing there is just like a little dab and then just burnishing, not burnishing, stippling it around until I get the effect that I want. And the beauty of it is because it allows you to work it for so long is if you're not happy, just get a bit of this on a cotton bud and just clean it up. It doesn't, it's worst case scenario, if you're not happy, you just wipe it off. Because the paint underneath, as long as you're not getting aggressive with it, will survive it, no problem. And I'm talking, when I say paint underneath, I mean lacquer or acrylic. So yeah, like I've said there, you can do dot filters. I know the armour guys do, some armour guys do dot filters to give it some variation to your paint colours. So different colours in dots, and then working that into the finish. If you work it into the finish and it's a matte or a satin finish, it will actually grip and stain. Thing to be aware of there is it actually stains. Getting it off again is very difficult, if not impossible. If you do it over a gloss, you can literally wipe it off the next day and it will not do anything at all. So I do my pin washes or panel lining over the gloss, and then I do if I want to stain it, I'll do a matte or a satin and then stain it afterwards. So I do like 2 steps for that. So you can see that on the Super Hornet there, all that's done over the top of a satin. So I could actually like feather it into it. I think that's a combination of things, but some of it was, I think the panel lining was done with Starship filth. And then the streaking was done like a burnt umber and a sienna and a little bit of smoke, and a bit of everything to try and give it some definition. And that thing on the side there is the last thing I built. That one was like I went to town on that. That's all done. All the weathering on that's done with oils completely. Okay, real quick one. I'm going to put my supervisor hat on. PPE. So we just talked about enamels and lacquers in particular as being particularly nasty for you. So when you're spraying, this is when this is a problem. If you're just hand brushing, not so much. If you're hand brushing lacquers, you still should be, if you're over the top of it and you're brushing it, you want to wear a respirator. So even with acrylics, if you're spraying an acrylic, like a water-based acrylic, which is non-toxic, when you're spraying it, you're atomizing it, you can breathe it in and it will get in your lungs and it will stay there. Best thing you can do to protect yourself from anything, whether it's enamel, lacquer, or acrylic, is buy yourself a good respirator. This one cost me about 60 bucks, I think, ish, and it's lasted me 2 years. As long as you seal it in the bag, when you're not using it, it stops absorbing crap out of the air and it will last. If you leave it out of the bag, it will last less long. You're going to want to find yourself, if you're spraying anything with volatile organic compounds, which is going to be lacquers or enamels, an A2 filter. And for acrylics, you want at least a P2, which is a particulate filter. That's what it looks like. This one's very sad. You can see it actually needs to be replaced. Because they're normally white. So I've used this quite a bit of late and it's getting a bit sad. As soon as you can smell anything through it, it's done. You've got to go and buy a new one. You can get different styles, and this you can get ones with replaceable cartridges. The beauty of this one is it's non-maintenance, no maintenance. You just put it on your face and use it, and when you finish, put it back in the bag, and when it's done, you throw it in the bin. And the last one you want to do is if you are spraying and you're holding the thing and then you're spraying it on your skin, get yourself some nitrile gloves or PVC gloves. You don't need to worry about this with acrylics. That's where acrylics are good, is they're not going to hurt you. If you get it on your skin, put it in your mouth. Don't recommend it. It's not going to hurt you. But nitrile and enamels you should be wearing, preferably if you're going to get it on your skin, like a nitrile glove. That's it. Any questions? No? Cool.